Welcome back to Guardians of Gaia, connecting people and planet. I am Megan Edwards. If you've just joined, our topic today looks at climate change as a gender issue and asks if a just transition can address gender inequality and the impact on girls and women. On our next feature, we provide the case study for how efficient public transport can address gender inequality and climate change in a big urban city like Cape Town. Let's watch it.
Imagine you lived in a big city, a place like any other in the global south, where climate change is real and the government is working hard to find better responses and solutions. You are a part of the team responsible for this in your city. The city has faced 5 heavy storms and floodings in the past year alone, but you have been luckily and largely unaffected. But this time, it has hit you too. So you have to take the bus today. The bus is packed and dirty, and it doesn't feel safe at all.
6 out of 10 women experience sexual harassment in public transport.
Everyone is talking about the storm, but apparently, not everybody received your department's official warning.
Women and children are 14 times more likely to die than men from natural disasters.
You joined the conversation about the impact of storm and flooding on settlements and infrastructure.
70% of the world's poorest are women.
And you tell your fellow passengers about the new flood protection dam your department is constructing, which will be able to protect them and keep them safe in the suburbs. But they don't quite agree. Those protection dams are not enough. Flooding affects sanitation, electricity, everything. The power has gone off completely at my house, and I have to move in with my parents just to be able to study. It strikes you that climate change has multiple implications. Your counteractive urban policies may not be as effective as intended because they were not planned around the people whose unique perspectives and circumstances should have been taken into account. The truth is, girls and women with children are the most vulnerable in situations like these and often the hardest hit. Yet ironically, across the world, the average woman contributes less to global warming than average man.
90% of care services in the global south are insured by women, which are unpaid.
Why don't you start with public transport like these buses? Another woman says, they're always packed and rarely come on time, if they come at all. And we really depend on them because there are hardly any jobs in the suburbs. You realize now that these women have a point, and public transport is a good place to start making a real difference. An efficient public transport system is not only reducing greenhouse gas emissions and aiding infrastructure development, it even has the potential to tackle social problems such as poverty and gender inequality. And when you plan around people, you will realize that your policies can truly make a difference to them.
We've been watching a case of how equitable access to an efficient public transport system can address climate change and gender inequality. Young black women in South Africa, for example, are the population group most impacted by unemployment, poverty and the environment. We ask, what does a just transition actually look like? How can we work together with youth for a sustainable future? And who must get involved?
Just transition will prioritize the poor, or it should prioritize the poor, women, children, and most vulnerable members of our society. It should eradicate wage and skills gap and establish inclusive social dialogues. Working conditions should be improved, especially for women, considering the care work as a huge contribution to the economy. It should be a gender just transition that enhances social protection and should be an anti-racist framework. It should involve rethinking our relationship to non-human life and to each other, and consider an economy structured around a redistribution of land and wealth, restoration and regeneration of territories, and people's and women's rights and dignity. It should be about democracy, accountability, and increasing the resilience of the poor to climate impacts through access to safe, clean, affordable energy. This transition should really reinterrogate the very notion of labor, so that care and domestic work, largely assumed by marginalized people, especially women, is fairly paid, valued, recognized, reduced, and redistributed. A just transition really, to me, means an agroecological transition that promotes fair and sustainable systems that respect people's food sovereignty and restores their dignity. It means having the right policies that integrates environmental, social, and decent work elements.
What we need to really understand first is that the youth really are going to be inheriting our land. They are going to be inheriting whatever it is that we are doing right now, the plunder and exploitation and harm that we're causing to the earth is actually going to be meted out on the youth, because they're the future generations who are going to be here to see what actually happens on this planet, the disaster that one's living that crisis, living that disaster. And I think even now, particularly looking at the situation in Southern Africa and in South Africa particularly as well, where the youth are so disenfranchised at the moment, it provides a potential for them to actually start making the connections between the climate crisis and the economic crisis, the health crisis that we face, the social crisis, because they can actually see what's going on in present, and sort of how particularly vulnerable they are now, but also into what and how bad things would actually get into the future as well. So it provides them with a certain opportunity of insight, I would say, to be able to understand this. And like I said, to make these connections. And as such, I think it provides them with this opportunity to be able to act, to be able to actually show resistance to extractivism, to show resistance to the destruction that adults right now are actually causing and inflicting on people and planet. So I think it puts them in a particularly a good position to be able to do this and to really try and raise their voices and act. And so we've moved out of the place where it's only people who are environmentalists or conservationists who start thinking about the environmental crisis. And we're now starting to more and more make those connections, link up the dots here and realize that all of the role players that are involved need to be beyond this, beyond the sector of environmental justice. In fact, it needs to connect in economic issues with health issues and so on, and including with gender justice or feminist justice issues as well. And as we've been pointing out before, the climate crisis really is a feminist issue as well. And so when we start doing that, we start to understand the whole sort of ecosystem of actors that need to be involved in actually tackling this crisis. So it really is about all of the different sectors coming together, from obviously from government, from civil society. It's about putting corporates, I suppose, in their place. So in some ways, the corporate sector needs to be involved as well. And so we all sort of have a role to play in these issues. And I think we have to see it as a multi-sectoral problem, a multi-sectoral challenge and an issue. And that's the only way that we'll actually be able to deal with this. Because we cannot actually deal with the climate crisis without dealing with the crisis of inequality, of poverty, and of gender injustice or patriarchy. And when we talk about economic injustice, we have to deal with the issue of capitalism as well. And so we really need to start understanding the root causes of the climate crisis and then address it with those role players that can actually help us address the root causes. Just transition has come from the labor movement and has been associated very much so with workers' transition. So workers who work in the fossil fuel industry transitioning to potentially working in the renewable energy industry. But the just transition is about a lot more than just about workers' rights and about workers transitioning from one dirty sector to a so-called clean sector. It is about the whole of our society and communities actually transitioning to a better, more sustainable livelihoods of whole transformations of society, which centers people and planet rather than being about profit and plunder of the planet. So that's what we need to think about. And when we talk about gender justice, it's intimately connected. How do we support women in this transition? How are women given more access, for example, and better access to affordable, reliable electricity and other kinds of services that are important to bring women out of poverty, to ensure that they are not only get equitable, equal access to resources, but get equitable access to resources.
We've just heard how we can work together for a sustainable future in South Africa. Our program today is showing that climate change affects girls and women deeply, and we've shown you global stories of organizing for climate change and gender justice. Thank you for staying with us on our episode exploring climate change as a gender issue. Next up, we focus on the question, isn't climate change everyone's issue? Join us after the break.